everybody, and let's get going for our second session. I'm Jill Rutter. I'm a senior research fellow at UK in a Changing Europe, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session on Northern Ireland. Other think tanks might not address Northern Ireland or might put them sort of rather late in the day, but at UK in a Changing Europe, we realise that Northern Ireland is extraordinarily important here, and I'm delighted that we not only have a fantastic panel, but we also are giving you a sneak preview of some just dropped polling on what's going on in Northern Ireland in respect of the Windsor Framework and the Safeguarding the Union proposals that the government agreed with the Democratic Unionist Party back in late January. So I am joined by, from Queen's University Belfast, the inimitable double act of Professor David Phinnemore, and genuinely needs no introduction if you were here for the first session, Professor Katy Hayward, who's been here already, and they're going to present the results of their latest testing the temperature, views of voters in Northern Ireland on the protocol and the Windsor Framework. And then to discuss some of this, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ireland's ambassador to the UK, Martin Fraser. Martin actually is treating his stint in the UK as a bit of light relief after doing 11 years as Cabinet Secretary. So just think about that stability in Ireland versus the turbulence that we have here. Anyway, let's get going. So David and Katy are going to present their findings for about a quarter of an hour, and then get Martin to comment. I've got some questions for them. Please do post your questions if you can bear it on Slido, because it's much easier to weave them in to the continuing conversation. And the reason we ask for short questions on that, you're much more likely to be upvoted if you ask a short question. Person who said, why can you only put in 160, whatever. It's also one reason why Slido questions are really good, because we can get through loads of them. So please post away, please upvote away. And without further ado, I will hand over to David and Katy. Tell us what's the state of Northern Ireland.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jill, and thanks to UK and Changing Europe for giving Katy and me the opportunity to present on the Northern Ireland dimension. I think a dimension that at various points in the UK-EU relationship in the last 5 years has obviously been at the crux of a very tense and fractious relationship. Today, I think it's fair to say Northern Ireland dimension does not really feature very much in national headlines, and this is essentially due, as Jill has said, to the Windsor Framework and the Safeguarding the Union deal, which was agreed earlier this year. I think it also doesn't really feature as much because some progress has been made in addressing the concerns, particularly within unionism in Northern Ireland, about the protocol, even if those concerns have not necessarily been resolved. The absence of headlines, though, does not mean, however, that the fundamental issues that have been at the centre of a lot of the contestation around the protocol over the last number of years have necessarily gone away, nor that there isn't the risk of the Northern Ireland dimension creating further tension in due course in the UK-EU relationship. And we can see this when we look at the data that we've been gathering over the last 4 years as part of an ESRC-funded project into views of voters in Northern Ireland on the protocol, its implementation, and more recently the Windsor Framework and the Safeguarding the Union deal. Key points we want to raise is that there are still plenty of lessons to be learned, I think, for an incoming UK government about the challenges of dealing with the Northern Ireland dimension to Brexit. Those are lessons which are going to be important to learn because the Windsor Framework is still to be fully implemented. We're only part-way through that process. Moreover, we're going to have Northern Ireland MLAs, the members of the Northern Ireland Assembly, voting later this year on whether to continue with the essential elements of the protocol. So it's still very much a significant political issue within the UK. So to give you some of the highlights of the sort of time series of various questions that we've been asking over time. The first observation to make is that despite the high-profile contestation that we've had around the protocol Windsor Framework, there is, however, support for these arrangements. A lot of the emphasis over the last number of years has been on the opposition, yet we do have quite considerable levels of support, even if they're only just getting over the majority. And those have been fairly stable over time. And you can see that, so, for example, in the question on whether the Protocol Windsor Framework on balance is good for Northern Ireland, but also the yellow line at the top there, which basically sees two-thirds, three-quarters of people actually saying that you do need particular arrangements for Northern Ireland to be implemented. Okay. What we also see is the Windsor Framework had a positive impact on public opinion. You see an increase there in support. It's not huge, but it's a notable increase. And I think our argument is that this is not necessarily a reflection of overwhelming endorsement of the protocol, Windsor Framework, but a sense that unionists in particular are warming to the fact that the protocol could potentially benefit Northern Ireland. But as our latest polling data shows, on the right-hand side here, any positive impact that we've seen of the safeguarding the union deal has essentially evaporated. And in some instances, and this is quite concerning, some levels have returned to pre-Windsor Framework. And we'll explain why later. Okay. Another way of looking at the protocol is not only in terms of whether the positive views about it are increasing, but also the extent to which the perceived negative impact of the protocol over time has been decreasing. And when we started putting this data together, I think 2 or 3 polls ago, we began to see a sort of steady decline in people thinking the impact was negative. Once again, we see here a slight impact coming from the Windsor Framework, slight boost there to decline. But again, while this year's safeguarding the union deal with the DUP initially saw the levels of the perceived negative impact of the protocol fall further, the data from our latest polling indicates that in most instances that trend has been halted or reversed. Worth noting here is the exception, the steady decline in voters thinking the Protocol Windsor Framework is having a negative impact on the Northern Ireland economy, the red line at the bottom. What this tells us, when you look at in a bit more detail at the other lines there, is that opposition and scepticism towards the Protocol Windsor Framework is essentially political. Okay. We see this overall trend in one of the core questions that people pick up when we do the polling, and that is around whether people think that the protocol on balance with the Windsor Framework, now with safeguarding the union deal, is on balance a good thing for Northern Ireland. The proportion of those agreeing that it is a good thing has increased from 43% back in 2021 up to a high of 56% with the Windsor Framework. Although note the decline within these figures in green of those who strongly agree. There's been a decline there down to 21% now. Most people, if they agree that the protocol on balance is a good thing, tend to agree. They don't necessarily strongly agree with it. The proportion of those disagreeing that it is a good thing has decreased from a high of 48% to a low of 29%, particularly following the adoption of the Windsor Framework and the announcement of the safeguarding the union deal. What we're constantly reminding people is you've still, however, got a third of the population in Northern Ireland thinking that on balance, or disagreeing on balance, that the Protocol Windsor Framework is a good thing for Northern Ireland. Those who strongly disagree, and we see this across the polls, are predominantly voters who self-identify as strongly unionist. And the most recent decreases in strongly decreased figures reflects the fact the Windsor Framework and Safeguarding the Union were designed to address unionist concerns about the protocol. Clearly, however, the latest data shows a reversal in the decline of the proportion of voters who strongly disagree that the Protocol Windsor Framework is on balance a good thing for Northern Ireland, begging the question, why? And I think Katy will pick up on that shortly. It's very much a question, though, of safeguarding the union being oversold, particularly in addressing key concerns. And herein, there are important lessons for the new UK government to learn about how it actually presents the outcome of arrangements it has agreed with the EU. I say that's probably both in relation to Northern Ireland and more generally. Okay. Before looking at the overselling question, a few observations to make on trust. When we did the first polling on this question back in 2021, we were quite struck by how low levels of trusts were, particularly on the left-hand side, which I'll come to in a moment. And I think the key point here is that throughout the implementation of the Windsor Framework, while we've been gauging the levels of trust, we've never really found much trust exists. Okay, so 5 observations on the data here. Firstly, there is not much trust around when it comes to managing Northern Ireland's interests. There is considerable distrust. The dark purple figures at the top there show that distrust in certain actors does actually get well into 50% or more at times. The figures here are from the latest polling most recently. Okay. Instead, there is a considerable level of distrust. Levels of distrust in the Irish government and the EU are broadly the same and equal. The same for the Alliance and the SDLP, 2 of the pro-Remain parties in Northern Ireland. The UK government, the DUP and the TUV, and to a lesser extent Sinn Féin, are distrusted far more than they are trusted. The only actors that are trusted, right-hand side, are essentially business representatives. That's an extremely difficult context in which to develop policy. Final point I'd make here is the level of trust in the UK government is very low. Its highest point across 11 polls is 8%. It's actually down to 3% in the most recent poll, the lowest it has been. The level of distrust is extremely high, currently runs at 85%. That's despite the fact the UK government has gone out, secured the Windsor Framework and the Safeguarding the Union deal, which is supposed to address the interests of Northern Ireland in the implementation of the protocol. Anyway, over to Katie now.
Thanks, David. So yes, just following up on this, it's worth noting that the UK government isn't trusted by either Remainers or Leavers or Nationalists or Unionists. So it's suffering as a result of trying to manage the impact of Brexit on Northern Ireland and accommodate the particular arrangements for Northern Ireland. Where we see movement, it is particularly within Unionists, and as we know, that's the community that the Safeguarding the Union deal was targeted at. And just want to point to the change there from the last poll in February to this one for the DUP and TUV. So when we dig down in those, in that data, what you're seeing happening is that the DUP are losing trust of unionists of all sides, and for strong unionists, they're moving more towards trusting the TUV, which is a very small traditional unionist voice party, very much on the hard line of being against the Windsor Framework and pro-Leave and anti the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And where does that distrust come from? As David has mentioned, it's very much around the sense of distrusting what they've been told, particularly around the Windsor Framework and Safeguarding the Union deal, and bearing in mind that the deal was really very clearly trying to address unionist concerns. It's notable that the majority of unionists across the board feel that the deal was oversold. However, it couldn't have helped the fact that the fact that the new DUP leader, Gavin Robinson, the very weekend that we took this poll, said that the Safeguarding the Union deal had been, I quote, oversold, so including by himself. So that doesn't help. And then we asked people to rank issues in terms of how important they are to them at present. What we note from the last time we asked them this in February is that there was a shift, most particularly in relation to immigration. So even though for the majority of people still in the bottom 3, we've seen a rise, particularly amongst strong unionists, of the significance of the immigration factor. And in many cases, according to the comments when we look at that, that's related to the question of what happens at the Irish border and the British-Irish relationship. And if you remember the row at the end of April with respect to the Rwanda bill and the possible implications of that for Ireland. So that's all in the mix here. We note that for most people, the effects of the Windsor Framework and Protocol are low down the list, as Annan was saying, the same is possibly true of Brexit for most voters across the UK. However, this isn't the case for strong unionist voters. So for about 3/4 of TV supporters, the effects of Windsor Framework and the Protocol is in their top 3. The same is true for half of DUP supporters. So what this means is, when it comes to the election, I should just say this, we see that for the DUP and the TUV, the Windsor Framework continues to be up there as a deciding factor. For those who support the Windsor Framework, more or less, they don't do so passionately. For them, for the clear majority of people, there are other things that are more important to them. although we see for over half of nationalists that they will only vote for people who are supportive of the Windsor Framework. We note the challenge for the Ulster Unionist Party, for slight unionists who've continued to be very divided on the issue, and it'll be interesting to see where the UUP comes out on this. Just what hasn't changed between the last poll and this one, and you can see the trend over time from March and post-Windsor Framework, is the split in those who would like to see their MLAs vote in favour of the continuation of the Windsor Framework. So this is something worth bearing in mind. At the end of this year, there'll be a vote in the Northern Ireland Assembly as to whether Articles 5 to 10 of the Windsor Framework should continue. So that basically relates to trade across the Irish Sea, the matters, dynamic alignment. And we see there hasn't been a big shift. Even Safeguarding the Union didn't change opinion on that, which basically reminds us that the DUP did accept the Safeguarding the Union deal, and they did allow power sharing to commence once more, but they did so on the basis still of opposition fundamentally to the Windsor Framework and the expectation that they would vote against the continuation of Articles 5 to 10 at the end of this year. And this is our last slide. Looking ahead, what would people like to see? Now, this is possibly slightly unexpected. So the question on whether the UK and the EU should pursue closer relations, we've asked this several times over the years. In this case, we specifically said about pursuing closer relations to reduce the need for formalities, checks and controls on the movement of goods, both between GB and Northern Ireland and GB and the EU. And in answer to that question, you can see a clear majority across the board of all political communities saying yes, the UK and the EU should do so. And that, of course, then includes a majority of Leave voters as well. So to conclude, it's an interesting meeting, and I look forward to discussing the results. I think it is quite clear that it's not just the nature of the agreement that's key, it's also the way it's presented. And as David says, it's not only the being honest with the voters about what has been agreed, but also about the original problem. And when we look at the comments that we've received in the polls, it's absolutely clear that the very nature of the problem, the Irish border question, and what it is to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, what that actually means in practice, it remains highly contested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. That slide showing a degree of agreement in Northern Ireland across something other than not having trust in the British government is extraordinarily striking. I want to come on to that in a second. I'm going to ask Martin to comment. First of all, I just want to ask you one thing. Do I think it's oversold because of the politics, or am I actually not seeing things happen in Northern Ireland that I was promised what would happen? So is it sort of legitimate concerns that you said X would happen, but it's not? Or is it just, I don't like the thing, you came and overhyped it and stuff like that? I'm just sort of interested in how substantive it is.
Yes, so it's slightly curious because when people say it was oversold, it's not that X would happen so much as X wouldn't happen. So we won't have any checks, there'll be no checks and controls and goods coming in. And the real challenge here is that we if you like, we could put it this way, that we never experienced the protocol properly as it was expected or required to be facilitated, and therefore the moderation that's made by the Windsor Framework isn't appreciated, and therefore any reassurances made by the Safeguarding the Union deal is on the basis of a sort of a very abstract thought anyway. So we never fully experienced it, and so what difference the Windsor Framework made is actually not properly appreciated. But yeah, I think oversold in terms of spin rather than they're not. I don't think people really noticed, the meeting of the East-West Council, for example.
Okay, and if I was in Northern Ireland reading the papers, would I be getting stories about shortages on supermarket shelves? Would I be getting celebrations that sausages have reappeared? I mean, what's actually going on that people, citizens, are noticing? So,
don't be jealous now, but there's some quite specific stories about, dental amalgam and flavouring and artificial flavouring. So there's the most recent flurry of interest was around the EU's banning of a certain type of smoky flavour, artificial smoky flavour. So Northern Ireland Tato crisp, for example. There are other brands available, but not as good. Tato smoky bacon flavoured crisp won't be able to be made in Northern Ireland, but we, because of the Windsor Framework, we can have smoky bacon crisps from England. So this was a kind of, well, this doesn't make sense. And so it's those kind of stories. So it's about Northern Ireland being aligned with the EU, and then it always comes back to being different from the rest of the UK.
And am I getting a regular drumbeat that sort of every day I'm getting a, God, this is an annoying story in my local paper?
No, but there are some there are people who are alert to it. And of course we have the role of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee now in the Assembly, thanks to the Windsor Framework, that is meant to be keeping an eye on those particular issues that may be coming up.
Okay. To come on to some of the work that's going on, some of the things that are happening in the Assembly. Martin, what's your sort of, from an Irish government perspective, what's your reaction to all of this? Are you thinking that's all right, they're going to vote to keep the protocol at the end of the year, broadly what we expect, or is there any other sort of thing that surprised you in it?
None of it really surprises me. It generally speaking heartens me that we're going in, generally speaking, a good direction. So, for example, the people who think it's what we've done is good for the economy is rising, and that's what it's for mainly. And obviously we've avoided the introduction of a hard border. We have the institutions, the Good Friday Agreement operational. We have managed to, I think, save the Good Friday Agreement in letter and spirit from some very genuine threats that it faced arising from Brexit. So, I'm heartened. This stuff is really, really complicated. So to put all the bars are of necessity the same size, but the strong unionist bar, if they were bars of voters, is the smallest bar. And what you're seeing there, and Katie has said this, but you're seeing, not unlike in this island, you're seeing a lot of emotion with people who are strongly against the protocol, who are not really interested in the economic benefits, or they feel emotionally very opposed to it because they feel that it's undermining the union. It's important to say, to your question about crisps and all that, like, you can read a unionist paper that will tell you it's terrible, you can read a nationalist paper that will tell you it's fine, you can read another paper that will tell you it's probably all right but sometimes not good. So you can get what you want from the media in Northern Ireland as well. So none of it surprises me. I mean, I suppose my big picture taken at all is that it is just great that we don't have a hard border, that the common travel area is intact, that trade is, broadly speaking, rising between Britain and Ireland, between north and south, and we have a relative stability. We do have an election ongoing, obviously in Northern Ireland, and Katie is right to point out that the DUP leader himself has said that the deal was somewhat oversold. So I mean, that has to account for some people thinking that. Some people will say it was always oversold. The other thing I think is worth pointing out, and this is where Northern Ireland never ceases to amaze or amuse or confuse, depending on your taste. But of course, the immediate political outcome of the safeguarding the union deal with the DUP was the election of the first ever Sinn Féin First Minister of Northern Ireland. That's what happened the day after. So, because what happened was that deal allowed the establishment of an assembly and executive which reflected an election which was at that point several years old, where Sinn Féin were the largest party. So Michelle O'Neill became First Minister of Northern Ireland as a consequence of the latest set of negotiations, which is absolutely fine. It's a democratic outcome, it's to be welcomed. But you could forgive strong unionists for not thinking this was a positive development or in any way helping the union. So always with Northern Ireland, it's just a very, very, very complex place. And so I mean, as someone who is interested in stability and prosperity of Northern Ireland and the operation of the institutions and good relations between Britain and Ireland and prosperity on all these islands, I'm encouraged at the good news, and I'm not surprised at the continuing concerns with some parts of the population.
So, Katie and David, I don't know whether this is featuring very much in manifestos. We're treated here, we keep on having 7-leader debates, and you'd be forgiven for forgetting that the election is also taking place in Northern Ireland if you're watching television here in London. But is this being much debated when you get your N-way debate between the leaders in Northern Ireland? Are they going hammer and tongs about Brexit and the protocol, or is it really focusing on these other issues that, you know, and is there anything interesting in any of the manifestos, David?
I must admit, I'm not.
I haven't seen them yet.
Yeah, I was going to say I've not read them because they're not there yet.
They're not there yet. Okay.
I think what you do pick up is that
They're waiting for your
those who support the protocol are never quick to sort of blame those who voted for Brexit because they see the protocol as being the consequence of Brexit. If you'd not had Brexit, you wouldn't have the protocol. What you then have is within unionism a fairly fierce discussion about who was right on safeguarding the union. That the TUV were arguing, okay, it was a sellout, that the union didn't get what they wanted in terms of reassurances, in terms of changes to the Windsor Framework. And equally, the Windsor Framework didn't deliver what they thought it should do, insofar as there's still an Irish sea border. And so that is very much a sort of a focus of debate within unionism. The interesting thing is to see how that is going to play out in terms of the support they get, because what we're seeing at the moment, the latest poll is DUP is down. UP has risen slightly. The TUV has gained some support, even though it's not necessarily where it was before. It's fairly fluid. And this is then feeding into some of the elections, some of the campaigns and the contests within some of the seats, where there are projections that, for example, the UP could lose 2-3 seats in this election. So it's playing out, I think, more than you'd actually have it within the GB context.
Katie, we've got a question here from John Davis asking, you've got the likely outcome of the Assembly vote. I think your slide suggests that the Assembly vote will probably be positive in favour of retaining the protocol. But what then happens? There were sort of slightly amended commitments, weren't there? Because whatever it is, it doesn't look like that it's going to be a cross-community vote, is it? It's going to be a sort of split.
So yes, so it's the MLAs who vote, and it looks likely that there will be a simple majority in favour of continuing with Articles 5 to 10, in which case there should be an independent review, and that independent review, thanks to Safeguarding the Union deal, will happen more quickly than 6 months, and the scope of that review will also include a consideration of Northern Ireland's constitutional place in the UK. And if you'll allow me, I might just respond to something that Martin said, if you don't mind. And this is to say that, so strong unionists are about 30%, so it's a sizable block.
30% of unionists?
No.
30% of the whole voters? Yeah.
When you put together DUP, Unionist Independents and TUV, more or less you're coming out with around 32% or so. So it's sizable. And it has a disproportionate impact, of course, because they can, we need them in the Assembly to allow it to function. We need them in the Northern Ireland Executive. And yes, I wouldn't say they're emotional, they're passionate about the impact of the Windsor Framework because they have been told by the British government that it affects Northern Ireland's constitutional place in the UK. And they were assured that Safeguarding the Union deal adjusts that, but this independent review post the democratic consent vote brings in the constitutional question to that too. So in this strange sense, because effectively we're talking about borders, there's this sense of massive constitutional significance to any decision made by the British government vis-a-vis Brexit. And what's very interesting too is hypersensitivity to what the Irish government is saying in this as well. And it's very interesting to see that reflected in this data. The impact of the Irish government comments with respect to migrants crossing the open Irish border was immediately picked up because it was this sense of, well, you could have a hard border for one thing and not for something else, which really highlights the, yes, the complexity of it, but also the misunderstanding perhaps or misrepresentation of what it is to leave the European Union. It goes right back to that fundamental question about border management. But this is why whatever the UK does in the future with the EU must bear in mind the British-Irish relationship and the impact on Northern Ireland, because it will always be sensitive, and our power-sharing arrangements of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement will always depend on how the UK manages its EU relationship.
And do we know anything about the process for the independent review? I mean, how it might be done, whether it'll call for evidence from people, whether it would do, take a lesson out of the Irish government and have a sort of, citizens dimension or anything, or is it just going to be, a few experts who sit and say, well, it's got a few problems and can't do very much?
I don't think we know. All we know is that the timeline, as Katie said, has been brought forward.
Yeah.
So I think within a month of the democratic consent vote outcome, an independent chair has to be appointed, and then they have, I think, 6 months to report. And
Following consultation.
Yeah, but what form those consultations will take, we don't know.
And Martin, has the Irish government said anything about its attitude to that sort of new commitment in safeguarding the union to do this quicker than we expected?
Well, not really. Safeguarding the union was a bilateral negotiation between the British government and the DUP, so I think it's reasonable to say we maintained a benign silence.
Okay. So something on which you might not retain quite such a benign silence. You might
Try me.
be a benign proactivism here. It's really, really interesting, this fact that almost everybody in Northern Ireland wants to see some of the sort of side deals that it looks as though Rachel Reeves was foreshadowing in that FT article that Anand was talking about in his earlier session, that we should do things to help goods trade. And I think the famous SPS deal early off the blocks. Martin, I'm just sort of quite interested. Ireland was obviously a very big player in the Brexit negotiations, open brackets, as were you. Will this sort of polling, if a Labour government came and said, we're interested in an SPS deal, was the fact that actually it would help ease things in Northern Ireland, would that be a factor in the EU's considerations, do you think? Or does the EU now regard the Windsor Framework and the safeguarding the union sort of add-on as you said, a bilateral deal not involving the EU? Does it now regard that as settled, or would it say, actually, we might not want to do an SPS deal if it was just GB, but actually this is really going to ease things quite a lot, and this would be quite helpful, so maybe we'll give it a bit more time and attention than we otherwise would?
So there's a huge amount of hypotheticals, Jill, as you know.
I know.
And you've invited me to enter the game in the 75th minute, and without telling me the score or even who's
Don't
playing.
worry, there's no VAR here,
VAR doesn't work in London, by the way. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
That's a book, bear in mind. What I would say is, I think EU member states and EU institutions actually cared about Northern Ireland and know a lot more about Northern Ireland than they did. I think that's a genuine feeling. It may be fleeting because in the nature of these things, officials and politicians come and go, and it's been a very formative and informative experience for an awful lot of my colleagues in the EU and my colleagues as ambassadors in London and people in Brussels and all that. So that can be sort of fleeting, and I think it's reflected in some of the polling data, and also in the reaction particularly to Ursula von der Leyen when she addressed the Good Friday Agreement committee or conference in Belfast, where she got a standing ovation last year. And so the EU is, I think, a positive force, or can be, and not everyone in Northern Ireland will agree with me, of course, about that, but by and large it can be. However, I think it would be very naive to think that the basis on which the EU will proceed with the UK and Northern Ireland as a component of the UK will be anything other than the way that Anne and others have set out. I think we know that it will. So the first thing, no matter what, is the Windsor Framework will have to be implemented. That no matter who the government is here, if that doesn't happen, we have another breakdown in another deal, and so that has to happen. And then Labour has to, if they are the government, or the Tories, if they are the government, whoever the government is, have to position themselves quite quickly, because Annan has set out the timeline. I think you can create a political context where there's a positive mood and positive momentum and all that, but you will still get back to, does this fit within the EU's negotiating framework, and what are the EU's objectives, and what are your objectives, and what is the terms of negotiation. So SPS and veterinary agreements are I think, probably closer to the EU's framework than some other ideas. So that would be, I think, not impossible. There are precedents for it, and it would help Northern Ireland. But I would love to say that helping Northern Ireland would cause something to happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. I don't think so. I think we have to look at this as a big EU-UK engagement, however it plays out after the election.
I don't know whether I wanted to come on to something else. David, you've written for UK and a Changing Europe about some of the things that have been going on since Stormont was restored, and some of these sort of skirmishes around applications of new EU laws to Northern Ireland. Can you just explain to that? And I'm just sort of quite interested. I think I've lost the thread of this story. What's happened with some of these? I know that there are one or two where they've been, they haven't got cross-community consent, so it's back to the UK government. Are they still in the UK government's pending tray? Is that going to be an early thing landing in an incoming government's desk to decide what to do? Are we just irritating the hell out of the EU? Where are we on this? Okay.
Well, three processes to mention with the safeguarding the union and return of the executive. One is that, as has already been mentioned, we've now got a democratic scrutiny committee operating within the Assembly, which is taking a very close look at some of the pieces of legislation which have to apply in Northern Ireland, or the EU expects to apply in Northern Ireland under the
And I think complaining that the UK government's not providing them with info quite in time sometimes.
Well, there is an issue there that, for the last number of years, obviously the UK government's position is, we no longer follow EU law, we're going to have the retained EU law bill, we're actually going to take a lot off the statute book. Well, actually, the UK does still follow EU law applicable under the protocol in respect of Northern Ireland. And that is a very, very interesting set of ongoing alignment. It's more than dynamic alignment, it's automatic alignment. And so these laws matter. The question then is, what resource do you actually have to monitor what's coming through, to assess what's coming through, and work out what the position should be of the UK in its discussions with the EU? There's a question of capacity. It's traditionally been done in Whitehall. We're now expecting it to be done in part in Brussels, in Belfast. And the question, I think, for the next government is, how do they support the effective engagement of the Northern Ireland, the committee in the Assembly, to engage meaningfully in these processes? The two processes which are particularly important, one is the Stormont break, which obviously attracted an enormous amount of attention, which basically indicated or was sold as providing the Northern Ireland MLAs the opportunity to stop the application of EU law in Northern Ireland. Oversold to the extent that it can only actually apply to amendments and replacements to a law which it continues to apply.
But that's because that was omitted from the earlier protocol.
Yes, but also I think the way it was sold suggested that if MLAs wish to, you get 30 MLAs want to not for a piece not to apply, then it won't apply. Well, all it does is raise the issue for the UK government to decide whether it thinks the case is there for non-application. And the thresholds which need to be met, or the criteria which need to be are exceptionally high. And so far, no attempt has been made to actually trigger it. The third process to be aware of is what we call the applicability motions. And those are examples or cases where the EU wants to add a piece of new EU law to the protocol because of safeguarding the integrity of the single market, but the UK government has to agree with that. And what it is agreed domestically is that it will only normally proceed in agreeing to the addition of that new piece of legislation if there is cross-community support in Northern Ireland. We've had 2 votes so far. One, I think, was more out of a matter of principle that unionists objected to the application of EU law. So that didn't go through. It's now up to the UK government to decide whether it...
And how long ago, how long has the UK been sitting on this?
Sitting on it, I think, 3 months, 3-4 months. But it doesn't technically have to notify yet. So I think the current government has obviously left this for the in-tray of the new government, what to do there. The question is, if it doesn't apply it, or that doesn't agree to the application of that piece of EU law, what the EU does in response. The provisions of the protocol allow for appropriate measures to be taken. We don't know what those appropriate measures would be. Okay. Worst case scenario is you could suspend access to the single market. So there's a lot of management to be done of the relationship in the future.
So, I'm just interested, Martin, is this keeping you, people in Dublin, awake that, we could get repeat vetoes of EU laws by Stormont, or failure to get cross-community consent more accurately, and UK government upholds that? Issue for an incoming government, obviously. Whatever, and then it becomes increasingly difficult for that, open border to stay there, because Northern Ireland looks less like the single market in goods than it did.
Not awake at night. No. It keeps me awake during the day, which is no bad thing. So I'll give two responses to that. First of all, David has explained that there's been two votes. One, that if my memory serves me, one there was no cross-community consent, and the other I think was 70 votes to 2 in favour. So I don't think we're going to have repeat vetoes. And as you say yourself, Jill, it's not even a veto anyway. My long experience in Northern Ireland goes back to before the end of the IRA armed campaign, and before decommissioning of weapons, and before devolution of policing and justice. So I have a healthy sense of relative trouble, and I just, it is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem we've ever faced, and we have to navigate it through. But the other thing I would say, and I've said this to politicians from Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland and these islands, but Northern Ireland, particularly the leadership, has a choice. It has a great opportunity. It has unbelievable goodwill from Washington, from London, from Dublin, from Brussels, from European capitals. And it has an opportunity with the Windsor Framework. And I speak from experience, but it's a fact that Northern Ireland has a habit to look inwards and to drag outsiders into its sort of internal politics, which is absolutely fine, and of course it's our internal politics in Ireland as well. It's all our politics, but I really would urge that they spend their energy and that goodwill on getting people to help Northern Ireland to prosper, to be stable, to move forward, to make the most of the situation it finds itself in. We can do either, and the European Commission will have it will not be awake at night either. It will have plenty of hours during the day to go to endless committee meetings about these things, but it won't do both. You can't constantly bring problems if you want people to work on opportunities. So I strongly feel that the opportunity for Northern Ireland is one that has to be grasped. It's a great opportunity, and that's where I would suggest that energy out of Belfast towards Dublin, Brussels, Washington and London and elsewhere is directed, if possible.
Katie, I'm going to go to questions in the audience.
Okay, I'll try and keep this succinct, but I think what we're seeing is the consequences of not having direct engagement with Northern Ireland during the process of negotiating the protocol. So it was very much, that sense of democratic deficit is rooted in the sense of people this being done to Northern Ireland. And we still have very little control, if you like. So we are very much buffeted by what the British government says and decides to do with the EU, or says about the EU, what the Irish government decides to do with the EU or the UK or with Northern Ireland itself. And so even comments in the last few days by former Taoiseach have an impact. And so we have this very difficult situation whereby we've got the most difficult situation across the UK and the EU, like it's totally exceptional, and we don't have the democratic resources to manage it. So our Democratic Scrutiny Committee really does need the information on time and to be treated, that communication between Westminster and Brussels and so on is more important than ever before. We never had a European Affairs Committee in the Assembly ever. So all of this is new, but we're dealing in a situation where it's still seen as hyper-significant for Northern Ireland's constitutional status. So we've got the worst things of managing it, and I do think we definitely see an overwhelming sense of people, we see this in the comments, just get on with it, we're fed up of hearing about it, and everybody can empathise. But at the same time, are we still asking too much of our politicians, in the sense that we are keeping it live as an identity issue. And even the way that they try to democratise it with the independent review and the democratic consent vote, in actual fact, what they're doing is saying this is still super important for Northern Ireland's constitutional place.
Martin?
I accept, broadly speaking, everything Katy has said. When I say that the leadership of Northern Ireland, and Katy knows that the words I'm using are carefully chosen, that in itself is a movable feast, shall we say. But I mean the elected politicians, the executive, the assembly, the civil service, business, the leadership of Northern Ireland, which is not a thing that is immediately recognisable as having a single objective. But I think it's really important that Northern Ireland tries to find a way to develop positive energy around the opportunity. And I accept everything Katy says about how people are feeling and what the polling result says, the lack of resources, the fact this is all new to the civil service, to the assembly, it's very difficult to do. We're constrained, obviously. I mean, I was asked by a unionist politician in a public forum, could we help more with the Democratic Scrutiny Committee? Yes would be the operational answer, but you would kill me if I tried would be the political answer, because I'm the Irish government and it's none of my business normally, if so from this man's point of view. But I really passionately believe it's important that the direction of travel has to be towards the opportunities. And I'm not trying to airbrush the feeling of strong unionists about this when I say that. But if it just becomes sort of, oh, this is all very difficult and all that, it's a huge missed opportunity. And whether you're a unionist or a nationalist, you should want to take that opportunity. And Katie's also right that Northern Ireland had voted against Brexit, got Brexit anyway, didn't the hardest possible Brexit was not possible possibly, but close to the hardest was chosen. So Northern Ireland is frequently not engaged, that's true. But here's a chance now. There's an executive, there's an assembly. It's difficult, of course, it's contested, but there's a chance now, and there's a general election in a month, but then we have no elections 27. There's a chance here to sketch out an agenda, and there will be help from all the places I said, and that's the energy they should try and tap into, not the negative. And that's not to diminish the negative, it's just what I think people should do.
So I want to come on to some questions about what a future government might do, but let's ask one or two questions in the room. We've got a question down here, sorry, that's a bit of a hike. Lady in the stripy jumper, as far as I can see. Yes.
Thank you. The Safeguarding the Union paper promised an East-West Council and Intertrade UK, and I think I'm right in saying that progress on establishing these has been quite slow. What tools do these bodies actually have to improve the flow of trade within the UK, and is there any substance to them?
Okay, and so these were two of the, as I said, two of the Safeguarding the Union things. Have we seen any impact? I think Arlene Foster's been appointed to chair Intertrade UK. Is that right? Former First Minister.
Yes, so we had the first meeting of the East-West Council on the 26th of March, and I think there are plans to expand it out to include other parts of the UK, as well as Northern Ireland, and there was good attendance at that from Northern Ireland Executive, and Intertrade UK has been established, and I think Arlene Foster is heading that up. And then we're not expecting much now, of course, for a little while. What will be interesting to see as these bodies, will these bodies be sustained? I mean, that's the key point with a new government, and how on earth do they fit in with all the other bodies that exist, not just for all of the UK and different dynamics of intergovernmental relations there, but also with the bodies that exist on the island of Ireland post Good Friday Agreement.
Because we actually have a meeting of the British Irish Council in the Isle of Man this week, I think, about to come up. I wanted to just ask, we're talking a bit about how the government sort of handle relations. Obviously, we've got some questions here about, hasn't sort of, had to move on a bit from some of the damage done by the initial approach of the Johnson government towards the Northern Ireland Protocol, things like that. We sort of seem to have done that. But we've got these incredibly low figures for trust, the 3%, world-beating low trust figure. If you were talking to an incoming Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, UK government ministers about to sort of look at this, you're in for quite a long time. This is going to be background noise. You don't want it to be damaging your wider cooperation with the EU by having repeated spats over Northern Ireland. You don't want it getting in the way of good relations with Ireland. How on earth should a government go about rebuilding trust with the citizens of Ireland, the citizens of Northern Ireland? David?
Two things immediately spring to mind. One picks up on something that Katie said, in which we've been, I think, saying for about the last 4 or 5 years. Whatever you're doing, do it with, not to, Northern Ireland. And I appreciate, okay, there will be a lot of people who were engaged with Northern Ireland, but I'm not too sure that the level of engagement that you've come from senior political levels over the last 8 years has necessarily been appropriate given the challenges which exist in Northern Ireland. The second point is be honest about the difficult choices that need to be made, confront them, and also be honest about why we actually have the arrangements we have. Because a lot of the political debate, I would say, in Northern Ireland is often contaminated by a false understanding of why we actually have the protocol. Moreover, and that's exacerbated by the way in which we tend to view now the issue as the Windsor Framework as being east-west movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. The rationale for the protocol is about the impact of the UK's exit on unique circumstances on the island of Ireland. And we sometimes lose perspective there. And I think there's a danger that the UK government is going to further alienate, I think, particularly nationalists from potentially supporting the arrangements that it wants to put in place.
And what would better engagement with people in Northern Ireland really look like? I mean, we seem to have forums, coming out of our ears now with the East-West Council. We're set up all these new institutions, so we don't just want to be in endless committee meetings and things.
Indeed, I think it's to give them substance and to be able to demonstrate the extent to which they are working and they are delivering. I think one of the things we've not touched on is there's been some interesting developments in the in the UK-EU joint handling of aspects of the implementation of the framework and incorporating voices from Northern Ireland. Now, they are in the early stage and they will be developing. But the important thing, I think, is to be able to demonstrate that structures and processes that you have put in place to reduce the democratic deficit, to try and remove some of the lack of legitimacy or improve the legitimacy of the arrangements, are actually working. So, for example, to what extent are concerns which have been raised by interest in Northern Ireland then reflected in the outcome of the legislation which applies in Northern Ireland? Okay, we'd like to be in a position where you can actually demonstrate that in the future, the way in which the East-West Council is actually bringing things about, because the last thing Northern Ireland needs are bodies which are essentially toothless.
So, Katie, day one, Hilary Benn calls you up and says, Katie, you understand Northern Ireland. How do I reset this so it's going to be a big positive? And we can, do what Martin said, genuinely seize some of these opportunities, because I'm quite pleased that people in Northern Ireland think this is good for the economy, even if they hate it for lots of other reasons. So how do I build on that?
I would say go and speak to Martin Fraser, because that British-Irish relationship is key, and it got completely overlooked, and it suffered the worst of some of the antagonism during the Brexit negotiations, but it's absolutely fundamental. You can't get Northern Ireland right unless that relationship is right. And one thing that is notable in where we've seen the polling go is what a difference the Windsor Framework made to the sense of positivity about British-Irish relationship and how that's taken a dive again. Because if you have, and it's really obvious, if you have that better British-Irish relationship, that helps British UK-EU relationship, and of course, it's always UK-EU now over the head of British-Irish, and then that, of course, helps unionist and nationalist relationships. It's fundamental.
Martin, you
wouldn't mind.
I assume you don't want to presume to it.
No, well, I addressed another group in private recently. Private doesn't matter, but I always say we have to go back to the principles of the Good Friday Agreement, and those principles are the totality of relationships, north-south, east-west, internal and Northern Ireland. There's institutions that reflect that. I'm off the Isle of Man at the weekend where I'll see the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach. Won't see too many British ministers possibly, and that's been a feature. I think I've met 2 prime ministers at British Irish councils, even though I've probably been to 20 or 30 of them. I've always seen the Taoiseach there, and the first and deputy first minister in Northern Ireland when in office. But anyway, the institution is the agreement. So whatever the direction of travel, you have to mind all the relationships and you have to mind all the institutions. And there is no better way of doing this. So I was asked, I said at the outset, and everyone looked at me, I hope you're all suitably glazed because it sounds very standard. And then someone asked me, well, oh, here's a hard question. What if Sinn Féin are in government in the south? And I gave the same answer. It sounds a bit different now, but the answer is still the same. What happens if you're going to do Brexit? Well, it would have been better to do it together. So I agree with Katie, like, and this isn't an Irish thing or a British thing or a Protestant or Catholic, Unionist, Nationalist, Alliance Party, whatever. We have to work together in the framework of all these relationships, and we have to work together. Because whenever any of us, and that could be the Irish government, it could be parties in the north, it could be the British, whenever anybody wants to go out unilaterally on their own, they get sucked back in eventually, but a lot of damage can be done. And a lot of damage was done before we had these institutions. But I mean, I know we talk a lot about the Good Friday Agreement, but it actually is the way to do this, institutionally and in terms of the relationships. And I don't expect the British government to act in my national interest, whoever they are. But I would strongly advise them that their national interest resides in working through those institutions and those relationships.
That would be a great point to end on, but we now have a couple more questions from the audience. So let's take two questions. I think there's a lady down here, and I don't know where Murren's got, and there's a gentleman back there. Yes. Let's just take those two together, and then, because, yeah. Can you tell us who you are?
Thank you. Bryony Kapoor from the IMOS Foundation. To put things in a slightly different perspective, I come from Kent. The population of Kent is 1.85 million. The population of Northern Ireland is also 1.85 million. The average income in Kent is about £700 a week. The average income in Ireland, though in euros, is similar. But in Northern Ireland, it's only about £550 a week. Do we assume that the elaboration and inward-looking nature of the Northern Ireland government has damaged the economy over years? Or can we look forward more optimistically, as Ambassador Fraser does, to the Northern Ireland government taking advantage of the very unique and wonderful position that Northern Ireland is now in to become more prosperous than either of those two other areas? And if so, would it be possible that Kent could become involved? Because we also have a unique relationship with continental Europe.
Okay, well, I'm not sure we're negotiating a Kent protocol there, but I think Martin might be about to recruit you to his to persuading Northern Ireland of the opportunities they're presented with. And yes, a question back there, I think. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Laurie De Luca. I'm a politics graduate. I don't know how I'll follow up that great question, but I actually had two questions for the panel, if you will.
That's definitely cheating. But
yeah,
anyway.
Sorry. One is that given that there's this sense of people being fed up with talking about Brexit and the Windsor Framework and Northern Ireland Protocol and stuff, that it's very low on the political salience. How much of an appetite is there in this general election in NI for a sort of like get Brexit done, like to just stop talking about it in the same way that we had in GB in 2019? And the other question is for Martin, which you might not be able to answer fully. What kind of experiences, what kind of opportunities do you see, like diplomatic opportunities, do you see as the main things to pursue for NI and the UK-Ireland relationship? If you can't answer that, then that's okay.
Okay, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to take the first of those, and Kent. Okay. Yeah, interesting question. Okay, we've now got an executive, so one would hope that we've actually now got some capacity to engage fully in thinking about what benefits can be developed and hopefully see a more prosperous Northern Ireland economy. But I think if I can extrapolate from your question the assumption that, okay, is the sort of protocol arrangement available for someone else in terms of that access to the single market? One thing we have to look back at in terms of the Brexit process is that whenever the EU was looking at Northern Ireland, it was very much in the context of there being unique circumstances on the island of Ireland, and what it was doing was not to set a precedent for anybody else. And I think there was a mistake in the UK government at some point where they tried to leverage the flexibility that the EU was willing to show over Northern Ireland to try and secure something bespoke and special for the United Kingdom. I think the starting point for any future EU relationship between the UK and the EU is not what's available in the protocol. It's going back to what the EU's basic principles are in terms of its external relations and the precedents that have informed it, and the fact that the UK is just a third country and will be treated essentially as such, even though it is very close. And the starting point is to be looking at Norway, and it's to be looking at Switzerland. I think this is a message which goes out not to the UK EU, but it's also gone out to Scotland, which we know was a very close relationship and was eyeing the protocol at various points. I can't see the EU doing something similar for anybody else, because the context is different. There's a border with a member state. It was looking after its member states' interests, as well as it was trying to address the joint concerns of the UK and the EU with regard to what Brexit might mean for Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I'll try and be very quick, just to try and link that first question to the second question. So for politicians in Northern Ireland, it's difficult to focus on too much on the economic opportunities because of the political sensitivities that still exist around it and the sense of vulnerability, and there's still, because of the democratic consent, it's still a sort of a live issue. And so when we see people, yes, those who are supportive of the Windsor Framework just see it as sort of necessary mitigating measures, they're not passionate about it. Those who are opposed to it, as David was showing, tend to be passionately against it, but that's because they link it to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland and its relationship with the rest of the UK.
Katie, are we seeing sort of business investment coming into Northern Ireland? I mean, is Northern Ireland actually attracting FDI?
Yes, there's a lot of interest, and it is beginning to be sold better now. But of course, the first question is, well, is it politically stable? You know, what sort of conditions are you? And it's never just what it is on paper; it's also the political context.
And Martin?
I'm available for a small fee, and if you want a Kent protocol, I'm not yet, but I have to retire, but it depends on how big the fee is.
Definitely employ ex-Irish diplomats in the negotiation for you. I think it's one of the lessons we've learned.
On the on British-Irish relationship, you know, look, it's our biggest relationship, it's our closest relationship. It's the biggest trading relationship. There are so many people coming back and forth between the two countries, so much history. And when it goes wrong, it goes very wrong. And it normally goes wrong, very, very, very wrong for Ireland first, but it rarely stays wrong in Ireland before it goes wrong for Britain as well, and that goes back centuries. So that relationship being better in all its dimensions is just a good thing. I feel really passionately about that. In terms of the opportunity for Northern Ireland, I mean, it comes back to the point about the economy. So first of all, stability is really important for investment and prosperity and public administration. And I go back to my cabinet secretary hat when I look at this, but also long experience with Northern Ireland. And there's a long and continuing situation in the Northern Ireland where the constitutional lens is placed upon what are essentially policy, domestic, non-constitutional policy issues. So Ireland is marketed internationally as one place by Tourism Ireland, the North-South body, but the Wild Atlantic Way, which is one of our most successful tourist products, runs from Kerry up to Donegal, but it stops at the border because, frankly, a unionist economy minister didn't want an all-island tourist product like that. We now have a Sinn Féin economy minister. He probably will. He now oversees Invest Northern Ireland, so they're now likely to be more proactive on the benefits of membership of the single market for goods, good CTA and all that. What I would wish is that these things didn't depend on the colour, political colour of the minister in office at the time, and that we don't have this zigzag, but that we could reach a place where people say, no, look, this is where we are, and let's make the most of it, as opposed to let's always argue about where we are and try and change it. And you know that it goes for the protocol, it goes for education policy sometimes in Northern Ireland, and it goes right up to the constitutional question. And I just think, and I'm at this a long time, like there was huge goodwill. Like Northern Ireland saw visits by the President of the European Commission, the President of the European Council, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the President of the United States of America, the Taoiseach, former presidents, you can't buy that goodwill, and it has to be worth a lot, and it has to translate into, you know, income figures or jobs figures. And I refuse to believe that the 26 counties south of the border have some special thing about them that the 6 counties north of the border don't have. You know, there are constraints north of the border, of course there are, and Brexit is a bigger one now, but there also has to be capacity to do equally well, or as well as Kent, if you're a unionist and you want to look at it that way. But there has to be opportunities, and like, it's hard. That should be a basic thing. You ask anyone running in the British election here about oh, absolutely, that's exactly what I mean. But in Northern Ireland, the policy framework just doesn't play like that, because the Constitution always sits over it, and so it might sound to some ears as this is a very sort of banal thing to say. It's not banal in Northern terms. It's a big change to try and make the most of this thing, rather than argue about how we got here.
Okay, I think that's a very brilliant, positive place to end, thinking more about opportunities than problems, which seems to rather dominate the conversation when we talk about Northern Ireland ever since Brexit. So can I just get you to thank my fantastic panel? Do look out for the full testing the temperature results to come out later this week, because you've just had a sneak preview of that. Talk to David and Katie some more. We're going to have coffee now, and it's back at 11:45. Thank you.